An impasse is when no progress can be made because of a disagreement or a stalemate. And so we've just seen something happen recently within the last 24 hours, which is that the Supreme Court suspended the Speaker of Parliament's decision, which was based on the Speaker of Parliament declaring that 4 seats had been vacated. And these 4 seats were vacated because these people are running for the 2024 elections. But the significance of all this is that there's an impasse, because with the Supreme Court's decision, it means that the Speaker does not necessarily have to adhere to it, because he has his own, legislative powers that guide him and govern him, and another arm of government can't tell him what to do. Saying that, the Supreme Court can hold him in contempt, and then he in turn can hold the Chief Justice in contempt, because he's not being allowed to carry on with his legislative function. So that's why I say it's an impasse, because it's a stalemate if everybody kind of has equal powers, and one decides to say they're going to tell somebody what to do, and the other one says, well, they don't necessarily have to do it in terms of the Speaker of Parliament. So it will have a domino effect, because should the Supreme Court hold the Speaker in contempt, the Speaker himself can hold the Chief Justice in contempt. The separation of powers is incredibly important when it comes to power and government, and this case in hand shows that, because we're seeing a lot of friction, because the Supreme Court is being seen as overstepping its boundaries and encroaching on the legislature's domain, whereas the Supreme Court could argue that they just want to make a final decision on this, and so until then the 4 seats can't be determined as vacant. But separation of power is very important between the judiciary, the executive and the legislative arms, because without separation of powers, they will all encroach on each other's powers. They'll create friction, and before you know it, we'll see impasse situations such as this, where each one of them can cite each other for contempt, which makes the whole thing messy. Furthermore, because the elections are just around the corner, it seems that this is sort of a knee-jerk reaction from government, in terms of they don't want it to be seen as they've lost control of the legislature, because they've lost 4 seats, and so NDC's majority. So in order to stop that happening, the Supreme Court has stepped in and just suspended this decision. So it means that the NDC technically is not the majority for now. However, next week it could very much happen that the Speaker comes in and says, well, I'm sorry, but I'm king of my house, so to speak, and that I am autonomous in terms of an arm of government, and I cannot be told what to do by the judiciary if, for instance, which is the present case, he's acting within the Constitution, he's following a precedent that Michael Quay Sr. set in 2020, and he was the former Speaker of Parliament, and he's merely announcing to Parliament that 4 seats have been vacated, and make of it of what you will in terms of who the majority is, because he didn't outrightly say that. He just said these seats were vacated. So it's very interesting times leading up to the elections, and a lot of the voters may see this as, well, if the executive and the judiciary are sort of going to gang up on the legislature, and these 4 seats have indeed been vacated, then we will show them at the polls who has the majority, etc. So there's a lot of friction, a lot of interplay between politics and law. But ultimately, it's exciting times, because it means right up to the elections, we're going to get some final decisions on this. And it also means that, should the elections come, if this is what's going to happen about just 4 mere seats, when the elections come for the 2024 presidential elections, then it means we might see similar things mirror themselves out in terms of people contesting as to who won. So interesting times indeed, and with this impasse, we'll see how the Speaker responds to this next week. Because the Supreme Court is also the highest court in the land, you know, there is no other court to question it, so to speak. But a lot of people have been saying over the last few hours that, you know, was the Supreme Court's decision even right? Because if they're going to grant a stay of execution, meaning that the Speaker of Parliament can't declare those 4 seats vacant, if they granted a stay of execution, there must exist a judicial decision or a court's decision. And so in essence, they can't grant the stay of execution because a fresh suit is pending before them, you know, so there's no judicial decision and there's no court decision that they're in fact staying. So this is why it's really, really important, I can't stress it enough, that the separation of powers exists, because if everybody stays in their lane, you won't have this sort of overreaching arms, and you won't have sort of people telling other people how to follow their procedure when they in fact have just as much power, just in a different way. Furthermore, Article 97 of the Constitution explicitly emphasises the autonomy of each arm of government, ensuring that neither the judiciary nor the executive can interfere with the proper functioning of Parliament. And so ultimately, Parliament has full authority to regulate its internal procedures and proceedings as stipulated under Article 110. So although under Article 125 the judiciary is vested with the powers to interpret the laws and adjudicate matters brought before it, ultimately the Supreme Court does not have the mandate to interfere with the autonomy of Parliament. As such, any judicial intervention in the internal workings of Parliament would undermine the separation of powers as defined by the 1992 Constitution. So as the 2024 presidential election approaches, this impasse between the Supreme Court and the legislature is very interesting indeed.